se non sono né buoni.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Massimo Russo and I'm pleased to introduce David AUTOR. The title of this meeting is Computers or People, Polanyi Paradox, that we are going to learn about immediately. First and foremost, I have to say that I feel like traveling on a time machine. So in a few minutes, we'll be shifting from the past to the future. And being here today after listening to what Mr. Cottarelli said, Mr. Cottarelli, was the Spending Review Commissioner, who told us that it was impossible to replace even the let's say, lowest performing workers in the Italian ministries. I'm talking about people carrying folders from one area to the other of the Italian ministries, despite the existence of email. Anyway, it is, however, clear that forces are already working, leading to the automation of tasks that human beings have carried out so far. And this is what we are going to discuss tonight with our author. The question that we often ask ourselves is whether machines are going to replace a human being. Certainly not, but they will change or human skills, whereas he believes there are some tacit skills that cannot be related to algorithms and therefore are not easy to be replaced by machines. And this is what Polanyi used to maintain with his paradox, whereby we know more than we actually know. And to understand what Mr. AUTOR is going to tell us, at best, I think we need to clarify a number of definitions. First, the definition of artificial intelligence. Tonight, we're not talking about thinking machines. Neither are we talking about of her. That is the movie that I believe many of you have seen. Nor are we talking about machines that can pass the Turing test. That is to say, a test that would prevent any other party to know whether he or she is talking to a machine or another human being. But we're talking about machines that rely on neural networks, similar to the neural networks of our brains, are able to learn. In other words, they are able to carry out slightly more sophisticated tasks than they used to, that is to say, recognizing a face or recognizing a cat. I mean, what kind of work the brain has to carry out to enable human beings to recognize a cat, and how can it make a distinction between a pornographic image and a non-pornographic one. And there is a ruling of the 60s in Great Britain whereby the judge said that pornography is something I can define when I see it, but I'm unable to define it with a theoretical statement. So even though we are far from seeing machines that are able to fulfill any human tasks as forecast in the 60s. Machines do, however, play a key role in our daily lives. A few months ago, a company in Hong Kong, and a Hong Kong financial company, adopted an algorithm within the board of directors that can cast a vote. In other words, the algorithm will be used to make financial decisions for the organization. In the latest issue of Wired, the publication I work for, we published 2 articles. The first was written by a robot, and the second by a human being, and it's almost impossible, actually it's absolutely impossible to make a distinction between them. There is a research study by the Oxford University by Michael Osman, whereby roughly 47% of professional occupations over the next 30 years will be automated or will be likely to be automated. And this means that they can be carried out by computers. And it's interesting to know what David AUTOR thinks about it. So I believe you have all heard about driverless cars or companies like Boston Dynamics or Minds that have been working on artificial intelligence and more specifically on deep learning. But it's not just a matter of artificial intelligence because there are many other forces at work that are molding our present more than our future. We're talking about a big data, Moore's law, permanent connection, 3D printing, and so on and so forth. There are two authors, I believe, will be mentioned by David AUTOR. They are also MIT professors who maintain that these forces that are currently at work are leading to a new age, the second age of machines, as they call it. Machines are not going to replace all the human tasks, but they will be able to carry out, besides the manual tasks, also intellectual tasks, low-level intellectual tasks, for instance, comparison of legal agreements or low-level diagnostics in hospitals or financial investments and, of course, writing. As far as I know, and I would like to hear the opinion of David AUTOR on this too, I don't think there is a real contrast or between these two schools of thought, but rather a different opinion about the speed rate at which this evolution will take place. And the questions that we are going to answer tonight is whether we are at a flex point similar to what we experienced in 1775 with the vapor, with the heat, with the steam engine, and will the chain value be mastered by machines going forward? What will be the jobs of the future, and how education has to change to keep abreast with this change? In the uncertainty, I believe it's advisable to get ready from an economic and also ethic point of view, as many scholars dealing with artificial intelligence maintain. So I'd like to leave the floor to David AUTOR now, who is a professor at the MIT and holds a number of offices in prominent academic institutions. He was a director of the Journal of Economic Perspectives. He studied psychology and then had a PhD in public policies. And before becoming a professor, he was a teacher to economically disadvantaged children and adults in the San Francisco area and in Africa. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to stand up just to help keep you awake. It's awfully warm in here. You should feel free to stand up, too. The title of my talk is Why Hasn't Automation Already Wiped Out Employment? Or another way of saying it is, why are there still so many jobs? We live in a period of automation anxiety, of people very worried regularly about technological change. Here are two recent examples. So the book, as was mentioned, by Massimo, by my colleagues Eric Brynjolfsson and Andy McAfee, Race Against the Machine. And a suggestion of that book is that people are losing the race. Or just recently published, Rise of the Robots, Technology and the Threat of a Jobless Future. And you can see why people are worried. Here's, for example, the Rethink Robotics. This is Baxter. This is actually developed by a colleague of mine at MIT, Rodney Brooks. And for those of you who are paying close attention, it's you can order one for $25,000. It's supposed to replace a minimum wage worker. Now, at that price, there's no extended warranty. So just to be careful, be aware of that before you order. So what I want to say, what I want to talk about today, 4 points. One, why people are worried. What are the proximate sources of their worry? What gets people concerned? Two, I want to put this in a little bit of historical context and talk about, previous episodes of anxiety about automation, of fear of automation. Then I want to talk specifically about three technological revolutions, one being the agricultural revolution, one being the industrial revolution, and the third being the current one that we're in, which is the computer revolution. It is revolutionary, no question. And what that means for human skills, for the type of activities that people need to do. Then, the last part, I'm going to actually talk about the future and the challenge faced by artificial intelligence and robotics, and also some of the progress. Now, obviously, I'm not a roboticist or an artificial intelligence researcher, and I'm not a robot. But I think I have a reasonably good sense. I spend a lot of time talking with my MIT colleagues about this, of sort of where we are and where we're going. People have very different views, so to make it clear, I'm going to give you one version of those. Then I'll draw some conclusions. And at the end, I'm going to talk, by the way, about jobs that will be here in 50 years, jobs that you recognize now that will still exist 50 years from now. Okay, so why are people worried? Well, here's one thing that gets people worried. This is just a picture of the rise of inequality. This is in the United States. This shows you indexed real wages from 1963 to the present by 5 levels of education: high school dropout, high school grad, some college, college degree only, graduate degree, like a doctor, lawyer, etc., PhD. And you can see this fanning out. This is for men. This is for women. So, for example, in the US, the real earnings of men with more than a college degree increased by 90% in this period, and those with less than a college degree fell by about 10%. If you look at women, you see a similar picture. In general, it's more positive. The slope is more positive, but there's this incredible divergence. So clearly, what that's telling us is the demand for skills has changed. We have more educated workers than we used to be, and yet their wages keep rising. Okay? That's one thing that has people worried. A second thing, of course, is a manifestation of that is declining youth employment, or that's one possible manifestation, right? So we see among low-skilled and among entrants. So it varies greatly across countries. In Italy, of course, it's 40%. You already know that. In Canada and the United States, it's 15%. In Germany, it's 8%. The fact that that varies so much across countries should suggest that it's not a universal phenomenon. It's not one single cause. So the combination of rising inequality and falling employment rates among some groups, among young, among less educated, and this is especially a phenomenon of the last 15 years, has people asking, is this the time when technology is making human labor redundant? So, just to give this a little bit of history, here's an earlier era of anxiety about automation. This occurred during the Industrial Revolution. Ned Ludd was actually not necessarily a historical figure, but the people took his story as inspiration, and they went around smashing power frames, which were an early water-powered weaving machine. And this happened sporadically throughout the Industrial Revolution. And what these people were responding to, understandably, was the sense that they had a set of valuable skills. They were skilled weavers and artisans, and they are being replaced by machines operated by children. Right? Most of the work in textile factories was done by children who lived and worked in the factory. They had low skills. Their main skill was they were dexterous. They could work quickly with their hands, and if you weren't quick, your fingers would be taken off by the machines. It was quite dangerous. And of course, they were right to be worried because it did devalue their skills. It created lots of other wealth, right? The Luddites were not people protesting against lower prices of clothing. They weren't protesting against the fact that they could actually, own more than one shirt and pair of pants, but it was directly disruptive for that group of workers. More recently, another era of automation anxiety. So, as many of you know, that what brought the U.S. out of the Great Depression was the Second World War, when all the machinery of production was turned towards the wartime effort. And there was concern after the war ended that we would return to the Depression era because there wouldn't be enough demand, there wouldn't be enough work. And what made that problem especially salient, especially on people's mind, was that productivity was rising extremely fast. It was rising at the rate of about 3 to 3.5 percentage points per year. So, for example, in 1964, President Johnson set up the Blue Ribbon National Commission on Technology, Automation, and Economic Progress. And they were there to deal with a productivity problem, and the problem was that we were getting too productive. And similarly, in 1974, the U.S. Department of the Interior wrote that leisure, thought by many to be the epitome of paradise, may well become the most perplexing problem of the future. Now, you may ask yourself, why does the U.S. Department of the Interior have this worry? Well, the U.S. Department of the Interior runs the U.S. national parks. So they were concerned that all these people with all this leisure would descend on the national parks, and they would be overwhelmed by demand. And this, by the way, was emblematic. This was the machine of this era, the Milwaukee Matic industrial machining tool. It was a computer numerically controlled machine. And you can see it's quite an advanced device because the man operating it is wearing a lab coat. So what actually occurred in this period of incredibly rapid technological progress? Well, a number of things occurred. One is that over the course, so this is as long as we have consistent data, I'm giving you U.S. data, from 1890 to 2014, in general, total employment rose throughout this period, right? Women's employment went from unpaid employment in the home to paid employment in the workforce, such that about 60% of women are working. In the U.S., actually relatively low by world standards. And male employment, it reached a peak in 1950. It's been coming down, but most of that's not a bad thing, right? That means, in general, we actually have enough resources for not everyone to be working all the time. But in net, the employment to population rate has risen throughout a century despite all this automation. Similarly, if we look at incomes, so in general you would say there's a kind of a five-fold rise of real incomes in this period, measured in terms of goods and services that people can consume. And another way to see that, here's a much more dramatic way to see that. It shows you the fraction of income spent on necessities, on food, clothing, and housing, the three things that everybody needs. And that has fallen from 85% to about 55%, leaving essentially 45% for necessities. For discretionary purchases, right? Those things could be leisure, they could be medicine, they could be transportation, but that's an amazing transformation of the sort of real material wealth. And that, of course, ignores all the improvements in health, in longevity, in safety, in quality of food, quality of experience. So the record so far has been incredibly positive, right? Despite 100 or 200 years of people worrying about automation, reducing employment, it's had the effect of dramatically increasing living standards without having any net reduction in employment. Now, let's talk about the future. So the fact that that has been the case before, everybody knows that. And if you say to people who are making this argument that we should be concerned about automation, they will say, this time is different. Now, it is different. It's not the same. So it's reasonable to ask. The fact that that technology has not created long-term unemployment in the past doesn't mean it cannot, right? It would be too simplistic to say it's never happened before, it cannot happen again. So let's talk more specifically about the nature of technological change that we're experiencing. So over the course of the last 170 years, we've undergone at least two prior technological revolutions plus the one that we're in. The first one was the Green Revolution, right? The invention of fertilizer, of irrigation, of genetic manipulation of seeds, reduced agricultural employment. In 1840, it was 70% of employment. In 1900, it was 40%. In 1950, it was 11%. In the U.S. at present, it's 2% of employment, right? And it's not 2% of employment because we've stopped consuming food. Look around America, not stopped consuming food. It's not because we're importing food. It's because we become so productive, right? Now, that's a massive benefit, but it's caused a huge movement of labor out of agriculture. Where did people move? Well, initially, they moved into industry. The height of employment in U.S. manufacturing was around 1943, at which point there were a little bit over 40% of U.S. workers were in manufacturing. At the same time, there was probably another 20% in agriculture, and the rest were in services. And then as automation advanced, as well as international integration of markets, people moved out of industry again and into services. Services is a huge category, right? It's everything from software to hospitals. It means everything that basically isn't agriculture and manufacturing and primary resources like metals and mining and so on. Now, let me say, these two transformations were very disruptive. Most people would say they both were hugely beneficial. They didn't happen automatically. Okay, so one could look at this and say, see, it always works out. Part of the reason it worked out is because people were forward-looking. So around 1900 or 1890, people in U.S. farm states realized that their children were not going to be employed in agriculture. They saw that productivity was increasing fast enough that there was not going to be that much farm employment. So what did they do? They started what was called the high school movement. The idea of the high school movement was to send every U.S.-born child all the way up through high school. That was considered a radical idea at its time. It was radical for two reasons. One, it seemed frivolous, it seemed excessive. Why does everyone need an elite education? Why does everyone need literacy and numeracy, writing? It seems too much. It's expensive. All those years they could be working on the farm, they're in school. The other concern was maybe most people aren't really smart enough to do that, right? You know, you're asking people to, you know, it's like I said everyone in this room should go out and get a PhD. Maybe you'd say, oh, not everyone's really prepared for that. Well, that was like sending everyone to high school at that point, right? That investment in human capital was one of the most central decisions of U.S. history in the 20th century. That is probably, you know, along with other good fortune in the United States, that had a great deal to do with U.S. success and growth because it made people adaptable, flexible, it made them innovative, it allowed them to adopt new technologies successfully and become technological leaders. Now, we're obviously in another period. We're in a period of computerization. It's not the same as the Green Revolution, clearly. It's also not the same as the simple industrial revolution. What's different? What is different this time? Well, to put that very concretely, I'm going to give you a very specific example. This is what many people think of as the first commercial computer. This is the Jacquard Loom. This is an example from 1801. And it is an automated loom that is controlled by punch cards. Right? And what makes it different from all the commercial machinery that preceded it is that it's a symbolic processor, meaning it acts on stored representations of information. Right? So these cards, this is not a picture of what it's making, it's instructions. It's telling it to lift arms, right, to use different threads. There's an example, a surviving program made by Jacquard himself with 10,000 cards that weaves a silk portrait of Jacquard. He knew what he was doing. This is the first commercial symbolic processor. This idea of symbolic processing is so powerful. In fact, the Jacquard Loom was the inspiration for Herman Holrith. He's the person who invented the paper punch card. It was used to read the 1890 U.S. Census, the first machine-read census of populations. He joined with Thomas Watson to found IBM. So this idea was very foundational. I would argue that modern computers are very much like the Jacquard Loom. They follow stored instructions. They carry out those instructions precisely, rapidly, inexpensively. They don't think for themselves, right? They don't make judgments. They follow instructions. That describes 95% of what computers do. Doesn't describe the other 5%. So what has changed in the next 200 years?
Quindi, che cosa cambierà nei prossimi 200, o meglio?
Well, one thing that has changed is the cost. So this is a figure from a wonderful paper by William Nordhaus at Yale, and he tries to calculate the real cost of carrying out 1 million calculations from 1850 to 2010. So this is a logarithmic scale. So each drop of this size is a 100-fold decline. So 100, 10,000, 10 million, so on. 100, a million, excuse me. So from 1850 to 1950, there basically is no progress. Why is there no progress? Well, there's more literate people around, but they're still expensive. So it doesn't actually get cheaper to do a million calculations. Then around 1950, we enter the vacuum tube era of computing, right, during the Second World War, what Alfred Turing was working with, for example. And then we enter the transistor era, which is basically a very small, inexpensive way of making a vacuum tube. A vacuum tube is just a switch. Then we move into the integrated circuit era, the microprocessor era, and in between 1950 and 2010, the cost of carrying out a million standardized instructions falls 1 to 2 trillion fold, right? It goes from expensive to essentially free. Cost of computing for most activities is almost zero. Not zero, almost zero. That's a big change, right? And that really creates a strong economic incentive to figure out what we can apply that to, because anything we can do with computers, we can now do 1 or 2 trillion fold more cheaply than we could do 50 years ago, right? So it creates an enormous incentive to take this technology and figure out what can we use this for, because it's like discovering, endless electricity or an infinite supply of oil, right? Whatever you could do with oil, you can now do for next to nothing. That's what computing power became like. What do we do with that? Well, the first thing we do with it is we substitute things that look like what the loom did, things that follow well-specified procedures, codifiable instructions, right? There are some jobs that really look like that. Bookkeepers, assembly line workers, people who follow procedures, well-scripted procedures, those tasks can be automated readily. If you think about what bookkeepers do, if you think about what accountants do, what people who type and file and calculate, people who look up information, right? People who sort through and retrieve, people who duplicate. These tasks are readily automated and have been automated. We see a lot of that. However, there's at least 2 broad sets of activities that we are not very effective at automating. One is what you might call abstract tasks. These are things that involve creativity, problem-solving, intuition, communication with other people, empathy, leadership, management. These are things that require a kind of mental flexibility that is not easy to codify. These are found in professional and technical and managerial jobs. Those activities have not been automated by and large. In fact, arguably they've been complemented by the technology, right? You can be a more effective researcher if you have access to lots of data. You can be a better lawyer if you can look through all the cases, right? You can be a better architect if you can calculate and redraw buildings quickly, redraw the engineering plans. So there's complementarity there. The other set of tasks, and many people find this surprising once you think about it, it's obvious. There are lots of dexterous, flexible physical tasks that we do that we're also not good at automating, right? So, working as a flight attendant or a personal aide or a waiter or a cleaner or a security guard. I'm even going to say truck drivers for a moment. I know you'll disagree. These are all tasks that have proved extremely hard to automate. And I'll talk about why in just one second. But there are many more of these. If we look around the industrial world, there are fewer people working as secretaries. There are fewer people working as production workers. There are more people working as lawyers, attorneys, scientists. There are more people working in personal services, working in restaurants, working in cleaning, working in home health, in assisting people. You can see this in a variety of ways. So these are data from the US. And these line up occupations from lowest paid to highest paid in broad groups. And these bars correspond to percentage changes in employment over the period of the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s prior to the recession, 2000s after the recession. What you see on the left side, you see personal care, food and cleaning, protective service. These are these manual jobs. Many of them are mundane, in the sense that they're not intellectually demanding, but they require a lot of flexibility. Those have been growing as a share of employment. If you look in the middle, particularly production workers, office administrative workers, and sales workers, those have been in decline. Many of those jobs are very codifiable. We see a lot of direct machine-human substitution. Now you look on the right side, managers, professional and technical workers, these are jobs that are abstract task intensive, right? They require that creativity, problem solving that have proved very difficult to automate so far. You can see a similar pattern across the EU. So this presents, this is from a paper by Guzmani and Solomons. They look at 16 European Union countries from 1993 to 2010. And jobs are categorized into low paying, that's the blue bar, middle paying, that's the red bar, and high paying, these are the green bars. These roughly correspond to personal services, technical and clerical workers, and then the high paying are professional, technical, and managerial. What you see is this pattern of declines in the middle skill group across all these countries. This is a broadly shared international phenomenon. And an important part of this, not all of this, has to do with computerization, with basically replacing those codifiable tasks. So why haven't we replaced the rest, right? Why are people still doing these jobs, and why are they still doing these jobs? Why don't we just computerize them all? So this brings us to Polanyi's paradox. Polanyi is a philosopher and a scientist, and he wrote a book called The Tacit Dimension, and just one sentence I like to quote, we know more than we can tell. What that means is there are many things that we do regularly, almost effortlessly, that we don't explicitly know how to do, that we don't know the procedure for doing them. The reason, why is that true? If you think about these codifiable tasks, clerical work, mechanical work, doing repetitive assembly work, these use formal tools that we developed for that purpose. Counting, mathematics, logic, right? These are all things that we taught ourselves. So we can teach machines because we produce the rules to do them. If you think about these non-routine capabilities, spoken language, sensor-motor skills, physical flexibility, judgment, intuition, creativity, these are things, we didn't create those, we evolved those, right? They're things that we developed not consciously or intentionally, we developed them as we evolved. So to try to teach a computer to do them, we have to figure out how we do them. We have to reverse engineer those activities, right? The reason they're so challenging is I can teach a person how to do algebra, but I can't teach a person how to walk, right? I don't know the procedure for walking, I just do it, right? So it's easier for me to teach a machine to do algebra than to teach a machine to walk. Walking is a problem I don't understand, I just do it. I know it, but I can't tell it. And that has been a huge challenge for automation, is we don't understand many of the things that are easy for us. It's easy for someone to vacuum a house, or to empty a dishwasher, or to look around a room and recognize all the people, even if you haven't seen them and their hair color has changed gray, whatever. It's very hard to have a machine do those similar tasks. That's has remained a huge challenge. Now, there are two implications of Polanyi's paradox. One is kind of an engineering implication, and the other is an economic implication. At an engineering level, it's very straightforward. We can't automate what we don't understand, by and large. There's exceptions to that, but by and large, we can't automate what we don't understand. So it means lots of things that don't get automated stick around, whether those are managerial tasks or whether those are personal services tasks. An economic implication is that tasks that are not substituted by machines are generally complemented, in other words, made more valuable. And the reason for that is that most jobs involve a variety of things that have to be accomplished together, right? So I'll give you a couple examples. If I'm a doctor, I both need to run tests and do diagnosis, and then I need to come to a judgment and prescribe a medication. Well, if I can run those tests more quickly and access better information, that means the value of the rest of what I do is increased, right? Because I can help more people or do a better job, right? So the fact that part of my work is replaced means I become more valuable, not less valuable. Similarly, if I'm if I'm a person working in a restaurant and I have a bunch of machinery, so instead of serving 10 customers in a day, I can serve 50. I can cook faster. I can make more lattes, though not fully automatic, just a little bit of help. Then my time is more valuable, right? If I'm a construction worker, right, and I can use powered equipment to dig instead of using a shovel, then that increases the value of my intelligence, right, of making the right decision, of deploying the machinery in the right place. So in all these ways, right, technology, it's not simply that the work goes away and nothing's left. It means the work that remains becomes more valuable as a consequence of increasing productivity in what is done by machinery. Now, so here let me give you just kind of one surprising example. Many of you are aware, of course, of in the last 30 years, automated teller machines, those bank machines, are everywhere nowadays. You would think, right, so this refers to ATMs installed. So in the US, between 1970 and 2010, the number of teller machines went from 0 to 400,000. Well, in the same period, the number of bank tellers went from 300,000 to 500,000. Now, that's actually a decline as a share of all employment, but it's still a big number, right? What are all those bank tellers doing? Well, once banks had ATMs, they said, gee, we can put ATMs in more places, and we can open little branches. Well, if you open a bank branch, you might want a teller there to help solve problems. Not the problems of the ATM, but let's say someone wants to make a deposit, or let's say they have an overdrawn check, or they want to open a new type of account, right? It turned out that the decline in the cost of providing these basic services created more demand for people to do the complementary services. And that's not always true. It's not the case that every innovation increases labor demand directly in that activity. But even in something as where you think it must be the case that computerization has eliminated all the people, it turns out not to be the case. Let me give a broader example. There are really three factors when you think about how technological change affects what the value of labor, of what people do that's remaining, that's not automated. There are kind of three factors that are important. One is workers benefit if their job tasks are partially but not fully substituted, right? So if I'm an engineer and I do some hand drafting, and then I get access to CAD software, right? I become my expertise in drafting becomes more important, not less important. Or if I'm a writer and I get a word processor so I can edit drafts more quickly, right? That makes me more valuable. On the other hand, if I'm a person who sets type at a newspaper and all of a sudden there's a computer that does that entire job, it obviously is not good for me, right? So it matters whether you're fully substituted or only partly substituted. That's one factor. The second, of course, is how elastic demand is for that service. So in general, automation reduces the price of making stuff. So as it reduces the price, that can either increase or decrease total demand for labor in that activity depending on whether demand is elastic, right? So in agriculture, after productivity rose enough, turned out there was a finite amount that people wanted to eat. And so eventually employment contracted because demand didn't grow fast enough with a declining price to create ongoing growth in employment. However, what we see in medicine is just the opposite. As medicine has improved and the ability of doctors, nurses, and all those professionals to improve health, right, demand has grown more and more, right? A contemporary doctor could do all the good a doctor could do 100 years ago in 10 minutes, mostly because doctors couldn't do much good 100 years ago. But as we've improved the product, right, demand has kept pace, more than kept pace. A third factor, and this is an important one and a subtle one, is the elasticity of labor supply. In other words, the number of people who can do the job. So, for example, I said that a lot of these personal services, like cleaning, like food service, like childcare, they're not becoming automated at a rapid rate. Does that mean they'll start to pay a lot more? Not necessarily. And the reason is because there's a huge supply of people who can do that work, right? Even though they're hard to automate, they're relatively easy for people. They don't require extensive schooling. They don't require extensive training. So even as they grow as a share of employment, that doesn't mean that wages rise in all those activities. And I think a lot of the concern that people have about the changing characteristics of jobs is those jobs that are growing at the bottom, those personal services, are numerous, but they're not highly paid. Okay, so I won't go into that one. So now I've given you a kind of an overview of, I think, what has been happening, but let's talk about what's going to happen, right? So, I've sort of said computers can't do this, computers can't do that, and you're sitting here thinking they will. That's going to happen very soon. This is irrelevant. And we can come up with examples of all the amazing things they have done. Driving cars, reading legal documents, interpreting X-rays. Aren't computers basically going to do everything very shortly? So, or is Polanyi's paradox that we don't know how to do what we do, is that now irrelevant because we'll figure it out, or computers will figure it out for us? Well, there are two different angles of attack, two different approaches that engineering and computer science are taking to overcome Polanyi's paradox. The first one is to basically change the world to make it machine compatible. I'll explain that in one sec. The other is actually to teach machines to learn. So let me talk briefly about both of those. Okay, so environmental control. Environmental control means making the world simpler for computers, right? If we can't make machines adaptable, let's make the world simple. And we do this all the time, right? Just to give you an example that's not from the computer era, right? If the car that you own or rent is safe, it's efficient, it's fast, it's reliable. It's also incompetent on most of the world's surfaces. You need an almost perfectly smooth and flat surface to drive on. Very little of that surface exists in the world. So to make the world car compatible, we pave it, right? So in the United States, the paved area of the United States is equivalent to the size of the state of Ohio, not a small state. Why did we do that? To make the United States car compatible, right? We simplified the environment to make it compatible with machines. That's one approach to automating more things. So this right here is the Kibo Robotics warehousing system. Kibo is a MIT-based startup. It's now owned by Amazon. These little pods here are the robots. Okay, they look like little vacuum cleaners. All they do is they drive under these shelves and pick them up. Then they drive the shelf somewhere else. They put it down again. How does this automate a warehouse? Well, what happens is, as stuff comes into an Amazon warehouse, they enter into the computer what has arrived. The robots pick up the shelves and they drive them to where the people are at the loading docks. The people put the objects on the shelves and they tell the computer what object is on what shelf, right? The shelves can't see the objects, they can't feel the objects, but they're told that those objects are there. Then the shelves drive their way back into the warehouse, right? On this flat surface, they pack in real tight because no one needs to get in there between them. And the software organizes the warehouse, right? So if people routinely, if they go to Amazon and they order a book and a movie and a case of beer, then the book, movie, and case of beer shelves will all be next to one another, right? That's what the software will do. Then an order comes in. What happens? Well, the robots, the order goes out, the robots drive around to the shelves, they pick up the shelves that have the objects that were ordered, and they bring them to Tim, the human pick worker. What does Tim do? Well, he stands there, the robots drive up to him with the objects on the shelves, a laser pointer points from the ceiling to the object, Tim picks it up, puts it in a box, sticks on a label, gives it to UPS, right? Okay, so what's happening here? Well, basically what the machines are not good at is handling objects. They're not good at recognizing objects. They're not good at moving around on uneven surfaces. They don't have arms or eyes or hands. So what Kiva said is, we'll just take almost all the job, the routine part, we'll simplify the organization, and then we'll just use human hands and eyes for the last bit, putting stuff on and taking them off, right? And that's one example of changing the environment to make it machine compatible. I'll give you another one, the Google car. The Google car, you may think, well, the Google car drives on roads like you and I, and that's true, but the people, computer scientists will often say the Google car drives on maps, not on roads. What that means is for the Google car to go drive in some place, you have to have a bunch of Google engineers who first go and map it, not just like the map you see on your computer, but down to the inch. Here's where the traffic lights are. Here's where the curbs are. Here's where the stop signs are. And then when the car drives in that area, it scans the environment to see if it matches the map. If it matches the map, it says, okay, I can drive here. Now I got to look for hazards, right? Other vehicles, people in the street, people who might come onto the street. And so the Google car drives on this map, and it compares what it sees to what's on the map to make sure that it's where it belongs, and it just needs to make these adjustments to small changes. But if you were to plunk the Google car down in the middle of a place where it did not have a map, it couldn't drive. And in fact, when the Google car encounters something that it is not expecting, it hands off to the driver. Right? This is actually a huge problem in automation in general, the so-called handoff problem. Right? This is what, for example, brought down that Air France jet some years ago. Basically, the computer got overwhelmed, handed off to the operators. They didn't know what was going on either. It's hard to get them to keep paying attention. Anyway, my point being that that's one example. Right? The Google car is another example of changing the environment in some sense to make it machine compatible. And we will see a lot more of that. Right? So when robots come and operate our appliances, right, when they drive our vehicles, when they go up and down stairs, the environment will be changed to make it easier for them. They won't have to use their eyes and their smell the way we do. They'll be radio tagged, right? So eventually all roads will have radio tags that tell the computer where it is. It doesn't have to look for traffic signals, right? It will read a different type of data. Okay, there's a second approach. So one approach to overcoming Polanyi's paradox is changing the environment to make it machine compatible. Another approach is to try to get machines to infer the rules. So if we don't know the rules, maybe we can have a computer look at the world and try to figure out what the rules are. So for example, one idea of this is to show a computer a large database. Let's say we show a large database of pictures and we tag them. Say this is a child, this is a chair, this is a car, right? This is a latte. And then we don't explain what those things are, right? We just give it those tags, and then the computer uses a statistical process called statistical machine learning, neural networks, deep networks, but basically to maximize the probability of getting a correct guess, right? So we show it a billion objects with labels, then we show it a billion unlabeled objects and ask it to guess, right? And by that process of what's called training, right, we never tell the computer what the rules are, right? It just makes the jump from input to answer and tries to get a statistical association for those things. This process is all around us now. So for example, if you talk to your phone to ask it to do stuff, it takes your speech and compares it to a big database of what other people have said, right, to try to guess what you mean. Or if you start typing at Google, if you just start typing at Google and you start typing, Taylor, right? Few letters in, it'll say Taylor Swift, right? Before you get partway through that, right? It's not because there's a Google programmer that has, entered a line of code that says, say Taylor Swift when you start typing. It's because the machine has learned or has inferred that if someone starts typing that sequence of letters, they will be typing Swift shortly thereafter, right? That's machine learning. That's the idea, is that the machine infers from behavior what to expect. Here's another example of that. This is from Google Labs, and this is a network of 16,000 processors that was shown a database of billions of images and not told what any of them were. And it just tried to organize them into groups, not with a name, but just saying these things look like one another, right? So it came up with a group of things that all appeared to be cat faces, right? They were faces of cats. Well, not all of them. This one's actually 2 coffee cups, but it looks kind of like a cat face, right? And what this example shows you, actually, the coffee cup is important. It shows you both the power of machine learning, right? Because the machine, it was given no information. It wasn't told what to look for, and yet it organized things into groups that were like each other. But of course, it also shows you the limitation. Because it had no context, no reasoning about what it was looking at, right? It would be very difficult for it to infer that that's not a cat face, right? If you showed this to a child, they would immediately know that. Why? Vicky, why does this not look like a cat?
Eyes and doesn't have ears.
That's right. It doesn't have eyes, it doesn't have ears, right? There are no eyes here, right? And also, if you look closely, the surface is incredibly smooth. It doesn't look like an animal. It looks like a machine-made object, right? But of course, for a computer to do that type of reasoning, it would have to have a much richer model of the world, right? So Carl Sagan, the sort of popularizer of scientists, said, if you want to bake an apple pie from scratch, you need to first invent the universe, right? So the difficulty here is we're trying to do a very narrow task, but to do the broader task, you need the whole universe of understanding. Let me give you a more recent example. Many of you have heard of Watson, the IBM computer that won the game of Jeopardy in 2011. And it did win. It was amazing. It also got at least one question spectacularly wrong. And it's interesting to see why it got it wrong. So the question was U.S. cities. And it says its largest airport was named for World War II hero. Its second largest was named for a World War II battle. So the correct answer is Chicago, right? The main airport is O'Hare. The second airport is Midway. It instead guessed Toronto, which is second largest airport is Waterloo. Not a World War II battle. Why did it do that? Well, if you were to type U.S. cities, World War II battle, second largest airport into Google, you would get a list. And depending on how you typed it, you might very well get Toronto, right? Because Google doesn't understand that U.S. cities is non-negotiable, right? That it had to include that. It just does a statistical pattern match. It's not reasoning about the full answer, right? So that's why this, impressive as it is, you can see why it would make such a stupid mistake, right? And it's because it's not reasoning in the same way you would. That doesn't mean it's not useful. It doesn't mean it's not powerful, but it's different. Let me give you a final example. What is a chair? So there's a long history of computers trying to categorize objects by looking at them. And it's difficult because objects come in many shapes and sizes. So if you said a chair needs to have 4 legs, well, you would rule out many chairs that have 3 legs. If you said a chair needs to have a back, well, you would rule out a stool. If you said a chair needs to have legs and a bottom but doesn't have to have a back, well, then you would include a table, right? So it would be hard to tell based on describing characteristics. So when people look at objects and ask, what are they for, they don't just look at their characteristics, they think about how could they be used, right? So you can look at these 3 objects, they all look somewhat chair-like, right? And you can say, that looks like a chair, that looks like a chair, and then you think, well, would I want to sit on that? No, right? And so when you answer that question about recognizing an object, you're using a lot more reasoning than a typical artificial intelligence device would use. And so the point I'm making is there's a huge amount of knowledge and expertise and understanding that goes into very basic human activities. And that's a huge challenge for automating them. It doesn't mean progress is not being made. But the idea that a computer successfully categorizes some objects or translates some text, that's not intelligence the way that you would apply it. Doesn't mean it's not an important achievement, but it's a long way from what you can do. Okay, so I'm going to come to an end now in just a sec. Let me say, first of all, one could be too pessimistic about how progress. So I don't want to suggest progress is not occurring. Here's an article from Popular Mechanics, is written right after the Second World War, talking about the ENIAC, which was a computer used in the United States for the war effort. And they made the bold prediction where a calculator on the ENIAC has 18,000 vacuum tubes and weighs 30 tons, so maybe 20,000 kilos. The computer of the future may have only 1,000 vacuum tubes and weigh perhaps, 1,000 kilos, right? So they were way too pessimistic about how fast things would change. Things changed a lot. So the progress is remarkable. I don't mean to suggest it's not. Okay, let me come to some conclusions. So let me say, here I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to tell you jobs that will exist 50 years from now. Okay, I want to be very specific so that I can be proved wrong. Okay. Building and installation workers, plumbers, electricians, contractors, installers, technical and creative experts and leaders, architects, doctors, professors, lawmakers, people who develop and test new ideas, like scientists, researchers, engineers, people who fix things, people who fix cars, planes, masonry, people who fix robots that fix other robots. Teachers, lots of teachers. There will be lots of teachers. Entertainers, athletes, musicians, actors, chefs, comedians, personal helpers of all kinds, people who help with careers, who help with physical health, with mental health, with diet and beauty and parenting. Sex workers, sorry. There will be sex workers 50 years from now. There'll be lots of robot sex, but it won't really count. Okay, so to conclude, one, people recognize the way machines displace people, but they don't tend to recognize the way they complement them. That's important to recognize that complementarity. Two, it's very hard to anticipate where the new jobs will come from. So if you'd asked a farmer 100 years ago, look, I'm telling you, farm employment is going from 40% to 2%. What do you think all the farmers are going to do? They would not have said, software, healthcare, business services, tourism, right? It's very hard to figure out. And so when people tell you it's not going to happen this time, I say, how can they be so sure that they know what isn't going to happen, right? Why are they so confident that their lack of imagination is proof that the world won't advance, that people won't come up with new ideas? That's actually a very bold prediction to say that we won't come up with new activities for people to do. I don't think that history favors that prediction. Third, the question, and I think the anxiety that a lot of people feel, is not really about the number of jobs, it's about the quality of jobs, right? The problem that people are concerned about, and I understandably, and myself as well, is that a lot of the jobs that are sticking around are not going to be high-paying jobs because lots of people can do them, right? And the challenge, and the response to that, and the response that we've had for a long time, is education, right? Is raising the quality and quantity of public education to keep people relevant. If we took the workforce of the 19th century and put them in the present, most of them would not be employable because they would be illiterate and innumerate, right? What made them employable is that we educated them. And that's an ongoing challenge, and it's a challenge we face now, and arguably we're not advancing as fast as we need to on that front. Finally, what if I'm wrong? What if the robots take all of our jobs? Well, that's good news, right? It means that we're very wealthy. It means we can have the standard of living we have now without actually working. It creates a problem, but that problem is an income distribution problem, right? That's a problem of how do we share all that wealth? The way we distribute wealth right now is based on labor scarcity. You have labor, people want to pay you for it, that's good. That keeps you employed for a lifetime. If really all labor were abundant, if there was too much labor because machines provided all, we would have vast wealth, but we would have to use a different system of income distribution to share that wealth. That's a big problem. I hope we face that problem. I don't think we'll face that problem. Let me finally end. So Herbert Simon, the only Nobel-winning economist who was also a computer scientist, was also worried about this issue 50 years ago, and he wrote, "The world's problems in this generation and the next are problems of scarcity, not of intolerable abundance." And when people are worried about automation and technological advance, they are worried about abundance at some level, right? And I don't think we've ever faced that problem, the problem of having too much productivity, too much ability to create, too much stuff. I don't think, and I think Simon was right 50 years ago, and I think he's correct now, although he's long ago past, so maybe he would have changed his mind by now. But the issue that we're facing, we face issues of income distribution. We face issues of poverty throughout much of the world. The issue that we have of having too much productivity, of being too good at stuff, of making too much too quickly, too readily, I don't think that's a major problem that we will face in the very near term. Okay, thanks very much.
Grazie, Professor AUTOR.
Thank you very much, Professor AUTOR. We have a few minutes for the Q&A session. Please use the microphone.
So my question is about
La mia
where you say managerial jobs have now been replaced by machines. What actually is driving that? So isn't it the case that essentially managers produce something that is not measurable, and so it's difficult to actually compare? If you produce widget, you can take the machine, and I produce 1,000 widgets, and the machine produces 10,000 widgets, the machine is better. So with managers, you can't do that. And so it's not the case that essentially society has responded to this technological progress and the middle being squeezed out by moving these people into managerial jobs.
So I think managerial, like many jobs that stick around, they have a variety of tasks, some of which have been automated, right? So to the degree managers were just information movers, right, coordinating who did what today, there are many fewer of them. But in general, managers also perform kind of supervision, evaluation, motivation. They deal with people's feelings, right? So all of those things are reasons why managers add value, right? There are still secretaries and clerical workers in the world, but they do something very different from just typing and filing and answering phones, right? They solve problems. They deal with complex situations that they don't have a computer program to do for them. So almost all jobs that exist have been transformed in the sense that the repetitive or just the information processing component has been moved into machinery. What managers do, what secretaries do, what drivers do, what factory workers do, the things that they do now are things that require something else, some additional problem solving, some additional discretion, some additional flexibility. If it's just about moving information around, it is almost sure to be automated.
Hi, thanks for your speech. It was very, very interesting. My question is, what do you think that government should do in this world? I mean, they have just to provide better education, everybody should have a PhD, or they have to resist the automation process, or they just have to put public money to protect the weaker workers, like the blue-collar workers, or maybe they should use money to finance automation, because in the short run the outcome will be better if the process gets faster and not slower, as politicians usually try to do. Thanks.
Good. I mean, my answer to almost everything you said is yes, except the last one. So yes, governments need to invest in education, and providing high quality universal education is one of the most important things that good governments have done over the last 100 years. It's also the case that the government's role is to protect people, right? There's always going to be people who don't make it to that level, and those people are going to need assistance. And these are complements, right? On the one hand, investing in educating people. On the other hand, protecting and assisting people who are not successful. And of course, we're getting wealthier, so we can afford to do that. And then it's also important to recognize that not everyone has to have high education for people to benefit from high education. So if you increase the fraction of the population with a college degree from 25% to 50%, well, that benefits the people who don't have a college degree. They're now scarcer, right? When someone needs to hire someone for cleaning or manual labor or in-person services or vehicle driving or for heavy, physically demanding job, there are fewer people to do that. So raising the education doesn't just benefit the educated, it also benefits people who have less education because it decreases their supply and therefore increases their value. So there's no one solution to this, but the one thing that has no successful history is resisting technology, of sort of saying, well, let's not allow that to occur. It's going to occur. If not here, it will occur somewhere else. You want to take advantage of it while simultaneously assisting people to work well in that environment.
I think there are two more questions. So I got a question about the technical progress. In your presentation, very interesting, I must say, you started from the assumption that technical progress is something exogenous and that machines can either complement or replace human activity. But is the technology progress that can be conceived in a different way? So instead of considering it as an exogenous factor, could be something that is more endogenous and therefore can, again, replace more than supplement or complement certain activities?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I agree with the premise of your question, that the technology is not completely exogenous, that it's shaped by market demand. You can see this in many ways. One specific domain where you see it is in medicine, right? In pharmaceuticals, right? Pharmaceuticals are developed to treat cancer, but not to treat malaria. Why? Because people in the rich world have money and they face cancer risk, but they don't face malarial risk. So clearly, economic incentives drive the direction of innovation. In a way, that's good because, in general, if it means something becomes expensive, there is an incentive to automate it. So, you should really be trying to automate high-skilled labor, right? People with PhDs that get paid too much. And you should be trying to figure out how to use less educated workers because they're inexpensive at present, right? So, in general, the automation does go in the direction of trying to reduce the cost of things that are expensive, things that are scarce, and trying to make use of things that are abundant. I don't know how we shape the progress of workplace technology to make it go more in that direction. I think it's a great question, and I don't think it's impossible that could be done. But I also don't know how to do it. And the market forces that do drive automation are so powerful, there's so much wealth, money associated with them, that it's hard for governments to shape them.
I don't know. Okay. Hi. Really, thank you for your speech. It was really interesting. I have just two easy questions. The first is, you said before that the box of beer was next to the book, that specific book. Okay. So it's because someone implemented that choice before. Okay. And my question is, will be robots in the future able to decide to put that book next to the box of the beer box? The answer is yes, of course, but because someone implemented it, okay, again. So in the future, will be robots or computers be able to identify space of improvements, find a solution, and implement the solution by themselves, okay, without implementing anything. And beside this, I wanted to ask if in the future, what we call in Italy humanistic knowledge, so like philosophy, logic, and these universities as well, will be more important than other universities like engineering or something like that? Thank you very much.
Good. Let's see. So, good questions. On the first question, I will say that there's, as far as I know, there's no current artificial intelligence that is able to sort of think of a new idea, or look at produce a different way of doing things, or have a creative insight. I don't want to say that can't happen, but it's very far away. The people who work on artificial intelligence sort of consider that a problem that's, way up the food chain from the problems they're working on. Most artificial intelligence problems are very concrete. They're, how do we recognize the people in a room? How do we tell the cars apart from the buildings? How do we take this chunk of text and translate it and yet keep its meaning, right? So the question you're asking, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I don't think there's even any real science on it at the moment. On the second question of the humanities and engineering, I think that those things are valuable now because they're valuable in, even if, whether or not you're interested in Renaissance art, the ability to articulate, to express, to debate, the ability to think clearly and analytically about any topic and communicate about it is a scarce skill. At MIT, I encounter students all the time who can't write, and that's a huge problem for them, and a bit of a problem for me too. So those human skills, that the sort of flexibility, creativity, the intuition, the expression, those will continue to be very valuable, and many of them are learned in the humanities. They're more valuable still when they're applied to a specific domain that has expertise, whether that domain is philosophy, whether it's engineering, whether it's medicine, right, whether it's entertainment. So cultivating those specifically human skills and then applying them to the right domains is, there is and will continue to be tremendous labor value in doing those things.
Thank you. I have a very specific question, actually. I'm working on income distribution, and so I'm quite familiar with your paper on polarization and automation. And actually, if you look at things a bit more closely, when you think about polarization, and your slide clearly show that, we're not really seeing an implication in terms of increasing inequality, but rather polarization. Polarization means that the middle skill sort of job go down, but actually you have an increase in the top wages, let's say, or the higher middle wages, but also in the low wage. So basically you could see an increase in automation and a reduction in inequality and an increase in polarization. You have Westerban and Ray, you have sort of axiomatized, polarization as opposed to inequality. So the issue there is not really increasing inequality, but rather the issue of the middle class, like in the United States, not really the same. It has different implications also in terms of political economy and instability. So what are your sort of predictions? Are you saying that eventually we're going towards more polarization, eventually less inequality, more instability, smaller middle class, or rather increasing inequality? Are we seeing, in other words, divergence, as Wolfson has theorized, between polarization and inequality? And the last question, how do you associate that eventually with the sort of consensus, or more or less consensus, around the decline in the US labor share, or more generally in the labor share?
Good, okay, that's a lot of questions. So the point that I was trying to make sort of informally during the talk is that polarization of employment doesn't necessarily lead to polarization of wages, because when we have growth of high-skill professional, technical, and managerial jobs, wages tend to rise because the supply is quite inelastic, right? Because it takes years to send people to med school or law school and so on. When we see growth of in-person services like food service, like flight attendants, so on, the supply of people who can do those things is quite large. And so at least in the United States, the only time we've really seen wages rise in those services is when labor markets were very tight and you had to pay people to do them instead of something else. The U.S. experience over the last 30 years has primarily been one of rising employment in low-skill work without much increase in low-skill wages. And the explanation I would offer is that as people are displaced from the middle, they tend to compete down, right? When they're displaced from clerical work, from industrial work, the jobs they can do are services. Much harder for them to go be an engineer, be a lawyer. So I'm not as optimistic as you about polarization actually leading to convergence at the bottom. I see much more of it leading to a large number of not particularly high-paying jobs. Your second question was, remind me, I apologize. Labor share, oh yeah. The labor share thing, right, so there's evidence that the share of total national income paid to labor has declined over the last 10 years in a number of countries. And that's surprising because it's been relatively stable for the last 70. I think it's too early to draw a conclusion about that. I think that the evidence is relatively tentative. This is an unusual period, and I don't think we really know. We don't know if that's going to continue, and we also really don't know the cause. There's claims that we do. It's always the case that people's claim understanding precedes certainty. The claim is that this has to do with automation and falling price of equipment. I think it's just as possible that it actually has to do with concentration of industries and the growing concentration of many sectors, and that concentrated industries have large firms that are very profitable and are very capital intensive and don't employ a lot of labor. So I don't know. I think it's something to watch. It's not something to just dismiss out of hand, but I think it's too early to conclude that we've now entered the time when machines just start replacing all of the workers.
Una qui a sinistra.
Hello. From an economic history point of view, you showed the historical evidence of technological revolutions, and my question is whether let's say, the results would have been the same observing not the US labor market, but the labor markets of the country where those products were sold, actually, were exported. As an issue, the mechanization of the cotton fields in US had impact not only on US farmers, but on Italian farmers that had no way to find a job in repairing those machines, let's say. So the point is whether in a globalized economy where just few workers can produce what all the workers need, and let's say if everyone starts working at those productivity rates, there's no demand for buying all the goods produced in all the world. We have a history of few countries, and we are observing just the technological leaders' labor markets effect on this. So my question is whether when on a global scale, if those technology will be available to everyone, whether we have to start questioning who owns the machines rather than which machines to invent next, let's say. Thank you.
Yep. So I think you make an interesting point. It is the case that, we could have a technological revolution in one country that would raise wealth but reduce demand for products from other countries, right? You can imagine if we really automated a lot of textile work, the hand work, it would be bad for Bangladesh and Pakistan, for example. So I think that's right. It's not, not everybody wins right away at all, and it can be extremely disruptive. However, we're in a period where wealth around, or standards of living around the world are rising probably faster than any time in human history
In China, 600 million people have come out of poverty in the last 20 years. In Africa, life expectancy is increasing really rapidly. In India and Brazil, the challenges that most countries face are not ones of technology, they're of misgovernance. And that's the real cost for most of humanity. The technology that we have now allows many countries to increase their standard of living much, much faster than if they had to invent it for themselves, right? They can make use of that medicine. They can make use of those machines. There's challenges with that. There's property rights, as you said, who owns the machines, who owns the patents on the medicine. But the potential to increase human prosperity is enormous. And I don't think there's any sense that we'll run out of demand. Poor people are just like rich people, except they don't have money. When they get richer, they'll want the same stuff, right? We have no evidence that people run out of ability to consume or desire additional consumption. So that part doesn't concern me.
Ce n'era ancora uno in fondo?
Thank you for the fascinating talk. You said a couple of things that I think are very interesting, but also to me open up a very important question. On the one hand, you said, and I totally agree, that it's very difficult to predict the jobs of the future. And at the same time, that the most effective policy that we can implement to allow people to adapt to new technologies and to benefit from them is education. But then what do we teach? How do we prepare young workers to a world that we have no idea how it will look like?
Well, it's a good question, but I think it comes down to specific versus general skills. I don't think we need to teach people Java per se, or you need to know how to use this arc welder, or operate Excel. The skills that people have that are truly scarce are the problem solving, creativity, expression. They have to be applied to specific domains, but those foundational skills are ones that we need to cultivate in everyone from an early age. The specialization comes later, and it comes closer to the labor market. In the last 4 or 5 or 6 years of your education, when you're preparing to enter the workforce, then you apply those general skills to a specific domain, and that's when you make those investments that are very specific. But I think that the fundamentals of education, the old reading, writing, arithmetic, those are as or more important than they've ever been. That actually people thinking coherently, analytically, and expressing and reading and writing are as scarce and as important as they have been at any time in history.
C'è tempo per un'ultima domanda? Qui al centro.
Thank you. I think the choice and the complementarity and the substitutability between machines and men is very endogenous, no? And its evolution is also very endogenous. I mean, there was a question on this before, but I'm taking the example, for example, of the chain for producing cars, no? Which is, the assembling line is still a very labor-intensive activity in a way. It is surprising because we also think machine producing is a very automated thing, and in fact it's not. And the reason why it is not is that you have to produce many different varieties of the same model to please consumers, and in fact it would be too costly to have machines really being able to develop all those varieties. So the reaction of the industry has been to keep, of course, this complementarity, but making labor much more efficient and reorganizing labor, right, through lean productions, and to making labor also the cognitive part of the labor tasks much larger. So this, in a way, has increased the productivity of labor and reduced its cost. And it makes the future option of replacing men with machines even less likely, no? Because still you have to have a huge investment in making machines very, very intelligent able to produce all these varieties. And on the other hand, the productivity of labor now is so high that maybe then we will invest much more in the complementarity between men and machines instead of trying to replace it. But I think it is an endogenous pattern that comes out on the one hand from the development of technologies, and on the other hand from the fact that companies have invested a lot in making labor or organizing labor on the plant and making it much more efficient.
That's an interesting set of points. I mean, I would say that there's a lot of machinery that's intended to replace labor but doesn't succeed, that actually makes labor more valuable. In fact, most people, if you read a magazine for industrial, for people who run factories, it never says, here's a machine that will increase your demand for workers. They say, here's a machine that will, replace people doing this and that and the other thing. It makes sense. The machines are supposed to reduce our work. But historically, as we have automated, it's changed work and made it more skill demanding. So there was decades of debate about computer numerically controlled machines. You probably are aware of this. So the Milwaukee Matic that I put up, right? There was a whole history of sociology and industrial relations arguing about whether they de-skilled labor. And that was the intention. The intention was to remove human expertise and replace it with machine expertise. It turned out that it created a generation of operators who basically had to be computer programmers, right? It changed the work from physical work to cognitive work. And I think a lot of that goes on in the factory. The physical work is much easier to automate than the cognitive work. And as you said, the flexibility is a huge part of that, right? Machines are good at repetitive actions, but if you have to do a lot of variety, that's too costly to automate. It also matters what the nature of demand is, right? If we are all just happy to have cheaper cars without lots of new features and lots of variety, then we could mass produce them, right? The Ford Model T, famously, it only came in one variety and one color. Turns out as people got wealthier, they wanted more variety, and so that created additional demand. And that's something that we tend to underestimate, how much people's demands rise as they get wealthier. In the US, if you wanted to earn what a person earned in 1915, a middle-class worker, you could do that by working 17 hours a week. Most people have chosen to pursue a higher standard of living rather than less work, right? And so our rising incomes creating additional demand does tend to call forth additional services and products and experiences that often require people to provide them.
Grazie. Grazie a tutti. Ringraziamo il professor AUTOR.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor AUTOR. We were talking about artificial intelligence, and I've seen so much human intelligence in the questions that have been raised. So that was a good sign. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Fare bene il proprio mestiere, non diventare semplicemente dei funzionari comuni di un'Europa.
Disuguaglianza. Mafia significa anche impoverimento.
Un treno che parte, una scuola che apre.
Perché dovrei preoccuparmi? Capiscono che la mafia è tanto più forte quando una parte.
Come si fa?
La scienza ha senso,
Difficoltà a fare riforme.
i contratti in sé non sono né buoni né